Steve Harvey had seen it all during his years hosting Family Feud. He had watched families celebrate victories, laugh at ridiculous answers, and occasionally get into heated disagreements over strategy. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened on a Thursday afternoon in October 2024. A single answer from a contestant would reveal a truth so shocking, so devastating, that it would end a 30-year marriage right there on stage. And Steve Harvey, a man known for his quick wit and ability to handle any situation, would be left completely frozen in disbelief. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these powerful moments that remind us truth always finds a way to surface. The Thompson family stood on stage ready to compete. Robert and Patricia Thompson had been married for 30 years. They were flanked by their two adult children, their son-in-law and Patricia's sister. They looked like the perfect American family. Robert, at 55, had the confident air of a successful businessman. Patricia, 53, was elegant and poised. They held hands as Steve introduced them to the audience, the picture of a couple who had weathered 3 decades of life together. The question seemed innocent enough. Steve asked, "We surveyed 100 married people. Name something your spouse does that makes you feel unappreciated." It was a typical Family Feud question designed to generate relatable, somewhat humorous answers. The audience was ready to laugh. Steve had his note card ready for the big reveal. But what happened next would turn the entire game show into one of the most uncomfortable moments in television history. Robert and Patricia Thompson had met in college at the University of Michigan in 1991. Robert was studying business and Patricia was majoring in psychology. They fell in love quickly, the way young people do when everything feels possible and forever seems guaranteed. They married 2 years after graduation, in a beautiful ceremony attended by 200 friends and family members. Everyone said they were the perfect couple. Robert had built a successful career in real estate development. He was driven and ambitious, often working 60 to 70 hours a week to build his company. Patricia had worked as a school counselor for the first 10 years of their marriage, but when their daughter Emma was born, she made the decision to stay home full-time. 3 years later, their son Michael was born. Patricia devoted herself entirely to raising their children and managing their household. From the outside, the Thompsons had everything. They lived in a 5-bedroom home in an upscale neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. Robert's business continued to grow and thrive. Patricia was heavily involved in the school PTA and various charity organizations. Their children were high achievers, both attending excellent universities. The family took European vacations every summer. They were members of the country club. People in their community often pointed to the Thompsons as an example of what a successful marriage looked like. But behind closed doors, the reality was far different from the image they presented to the world. Over the years, Robert had become increasingly absent from the emotional life of his family. His work consumed him, not just physically but mentally. When he was home, he was checking emails, taking business calls, or thinking about his next deal. He provided financially, generously even, but he had stopped being truly present years ago. Patricia had tried to talk to him about it countless times over the years. She had suggested marriage counseling when the kids were in middle school. Robert had dismissed it, saying they didn't need therapy because they weren't fighting. And that was technically true. They didn't fight. They didn't do much of anything together. They lived parallel lives under the same roof, roommates more than romantic partners. Patricia had buried her feelings for years. She threw herself into her children's lives, finding purpose in their activities and achievements. She told herself that this was just what happened in long marriages, that the passion faded and what remained was partnership. She attended Robert's business dinners and smiled for photos. She spent holidays with his family and never complained. She played her role perfectly, but something had changed in Patricia over the past 2 years. Both children had graduated from college and moved out. Emma was married and living in Denver. Michael was in graduate school in Boston. For the first time in 25 years, Patricia was alone with her thoughts and her feelings. The house was quiet. There were no more kids to distract her from the reality of her marriage. She found herself looking at Robert across the dinner table and realizing they had nothing to say to each other. She had started seeing a therapist 6 months before the Family Feud appearance. In therapy, Patricia was finally being honest about her feelings. She talked about feeling invisible in her own marriage. She talked about how Robert could spend an entire evening in the same room with her without actually seeing her. She talked about going weeks without a meaningful conversation. She talked about feeling more lonely when he was home than when he was traveling for business. The therapist had asked Patricia a crucial question during one session. "If you could say anything to Robert without fear of the consequences, what would you say?" Patricia had broken down crying. The truth that came out in that session was something she had been suppressing for over a decade. She felt unappreciated, unseen, and unloved. She felt like her only value to Robert was as a caretaker for his home and children. Now that the children were grown, she felt like she had no purpose in his life at all. Robert, for his part, genuinely believed everything was fine. He saw his marriage as successful because there was no conflict. Patricia never complained, never demanded his attention, never made him feel guilty about his work schedule. He provided well for his family. He was faithful. He showed up for important events. In his mind, he was doing everything a husband should do. The idea that Patricia might be deeply unhappy never even crossed his mind. The Family Feud audition had come about through Patricia's sister, Karen. Karen had applied for the show and asked Patricia to be part of the family team. Patricia had hesitated at first. The idea of going on national television felt uncomfortable. But Karen had been persistent, and eventually Patricia agreed. It would be a fun family experience, she told herself. Just one day of laughter and games. Robert had been reluctant to participate. He had a busy work schedule and didn't particularly enjoy game shows, but Emma and Michael had both been excited about it, and he didn't want to be the one to say no. So he cleared his calendar for the day and agreed to go. In typical Robert fashion, he approached it as an obligation to be fulfilled rather than an experience to be enjoyed. The Thompson family arrived at the Family Feud studio on a clear October morning. The energy was high. The other family they were competing against was friendly, and Steve Harvey was in excellent form, keeping everyone laughing during the warm-up. Patricia found herself relaxing and actually enjoying the experience. For a few hours, she wasn't thinking about her unhappy marriage or her uncertain future. She was just playing a game with her family. The game started well for the Thompsons. They won the first face-off when Emma quickly answered a question about popular vacation destinations. Robert played the next round, getting 3 answers on the board about things people forget to pack when traveling. He was smiling, competitive, clearly enjoying the challenge. Patricia watched him and thought about how rare it was to see him relaxed and present like this. The Thompsons were leading by a comfortable margin when Steve moved to the next question. It was Patricia's turn at the podium. Steve read the card with his characteristic enthusiasm. "All right, Patricia, we surveyed 100 married people. Name something your spouse does that makes you feel unappreciated." The audience chuckled in anticipation. This was exactly the kind of question that usually generated funny, relatable answers. Patricia stood at the podium, her hand on the button. For most contestants, this would be a simple question. They would say something like, "Doesn't say thank you," or "Doesn't notice when I clean," or "Forgets important dates." Safe answers that everyone could relate to and laugh about. But as Patricia stood there, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the therapy sessions that had been forcing her to be honest. Maybe it was the fact that her children were there and she wanted them to understand what she had been through. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of pretending. Steve was waiting for her answer, smiling, ready to react with his usual humor. The audience was quiet, attentive. Robert stood behind her with the rest of the family, confident and relaxed. He had no idea what was about to happen. None of them did. Patricia took a deep breath, and then she said words that would change everything. "Treats me like I'm invisible," Patricia said, her voice clear and steady. But she didn't stop there. The dam had broken, and years of suppressed feelings came flooding out. "For 30 years, I have been nothing more than a housekeeper and a mother to our children. My husband can be in the same room with me for hours and never once ask me how I'm doing or what I'm thinking. He knows the names of every client in his business, but he doesn't know what books I'm reading or what dreams I have. He shows up for the big events but misses every small moment that actually matters. I have felt invisible in my own marriage for over a decade." The studio fell completely silent. This was not a typical Family Feud answer. This was raw, unfiltered truth being spoken on national television. Steve Harvey's smile faded. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He stood frozen, his note card hanging limply in his hand. The audience didn't know how to react. A few people gasped. Others sat in stunned silence. Behind Patricia, the reaction was immediate and visible. Robert's face went through a series of emotions in rapid succession: confusion, shock, embarrassment, and then anger. Emma covered her mouth with her hand, tears instantly forming in her eyes. Michael looked at his father, then at his mother, then back at his father. Karen, Patricia's sister, closed her eyes as if she had known this was coming. The son-in-law, Brad, took a step back, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Patricia turned around to face Robert. There were tears streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. "I'm sorry to do this here. I'm sorry to do this on television, but you wouldn't listen when I tried to talk to you at home. You dismissed every attempt I made to tell you I was unhappy. You thought everything was fine because I stopped complaining. But my silence wasn't acceptance. It was resignation. I gave up trying to make you see me. Robert finally found his voice. Patricia, what are you doing? This is not the time or place for this conversation. His voice was tight, controlled, the same tone he used in difficult business negotiations, but Patricia shook her head. When is the time, Robert? When would you have been available for this conversation? Between your board meetings and golf games? During one of the dinners where you check your phone every 5 minutes? There is no good time because you never make time for anything that matters. Steve Harvey finally regained his composure enough to intervene. Folks, I think we need to take a break here. He looked at the production crew, then back at the family. Patricia, Robert, maybe you should step backstage and have this conversation privately. But Patricia shook her head firmly. No, I've been private about my feelings for 30 years. I've protected your image and our reputation at the cost of my own happiness. If this is going to end, it's going to be honest. Emma stepped forward, her voice shaking. Mom, please, we don't have to do this here. We can go somewhere and talk as a family. Patricia looked at her daughter with love and sadness. Sweetheart, I know this is hard for you to hear, but you need to understand something. When you get married someday, if you ever feel invisible, if you ever feel unappreciated, if you ever feel like you're giving everything and getting nothing back, don't stay silent for 30 years like I did. Don't wait until you're standing on a game show stage to finally tell your truth. Michael, always the problem solver, tried a different approach. Dad, say something. Tell Mom she's wrong. Tell her you appreciate everything she's done. But Robert couldn't say those words. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The truth was that he had taken Patricia for granted. He had assumed she would always be there, always be satisfied with the role she played. He had never asked if she was happy because he didn't want to know the answer. Steve Harvey took a deep breath and made a decision. Instead of cutting to commercial or clearing the stage, he pulled up a chair and sat down right there on the Family Feud set. He gestured for Patricia and Robert to sit as well. All right, Steve said, his voice gentle but firm. We're going to have a real conversation right now. Production, keep rolling. Sometimes life doesn't wait for the right moment, and I think America needs to see this. Steve looked at Robert first. Sir, I've been married 3 times. I've made a lot of mistakes as a husband. But one thing I learned is that when your wife tells you she feels invisible, you don't get defensive. You don't argue about whether she should feel that way. You listen. Because if she feels invisible, then you've failed at one of the most basic responsibilities of marriage, which is making your partner feel seen and valued. Robert started to respond, but Steve held up his hand. I'm not done. You're sitting here embarrassed because your wife spoke her truth on television, but think about how lonely she must have been to feel like this was the only way she could get you to actually hear her. Think about how many conversations she probably tried to have that you dismissed or ignored. Think about how many nights she went to bed feeling alone even though you were right there next to her. Your embarrassment right now is nothing compared to years of feeling invisible in your own home. The audience was completely silent. This was no longer a game show. This was real marriage counseling happening in real time on national television. Steve turned to Patricia. And ma'am, I hear you. I understand why you finally spoke up, but I have to ask you something. Why did you wait so long? Why did you stay silent for years if you were this unhappy? Patricia wiped her tears and answered honestly. Because I was raised to believe that good wives don't complain. My mother stayed with my father through 45 years of marriage, and she never once criticized him. I thought that's what you were supposed to do. Be grateful for what you have. Don't make waves. Support your husband's career. Raise your children. Keep a nice home. I did all of those things perfectly, but somewhere along the way I lost myself completely. I don't even know who Patricia is anymore outside of being Robert's wife and Emma and Michael's mother. Steve nodded slowly. That's the tragedy right there. You both fell into roles instead of being partners. Robert, you played the provider. You thought money and status were enough. Patricia, you played the perfect wife. You thought sacrifice and silence were virtues. But marriage isn't about playing roles. It's about being 2 whole people who choose each other every day, who see each other, who talk to each other, who fight for the relationship when it starts to fade. Robert finally spoke, his voice breaking. I thought you were happy. You never said anything. You smiled at my business dinners. You never refused when I needed you to host clients. You always said everything was fine when I asked. Patricia laughed bitterly. Because you asked while walking out the door. You asked while looking at your phone. You asked in passing, never stopping long enough to see the truth on my face. And I learned that you didn't really want to know the answer. You wanted me to say fine so you could move on with your day. But I should have been honest, Patricia continued. I should have insisted on counseling years ago. I should have told you clearly that I was drowning instead of just dropping hints and hoping you would notice. I own my part in this. I let resentment build instead of addressing problems when they were still small. I created a perfect facade and then felt betrayed when you believed it. That wasn't fair to either of us. Emma spoke up from behind them, her voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. All these years, I thought you two had the perfect marriage. I thought that's what I should aspire to. Patricia turned to her daughter. And that's exactly why I needed to speak up now, because I don't want you making the same mistakes I did. I don't want you thinking that a marriage is successful just because it looks good from the outside. Real success is measured in how you feel when you're alone together. It's measured in whether you still talk about your dreams. It's measured in whether you feel more yourself or less yourself with your partner. Steve stood up and addressed the audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, we're witnessing something important here. This isn't entertainment. This is a cautionary tale about what happens when people stop communicating, when people assume instead of asking, when people settle for looking happy instead of actually being happy. Every couple watching this needs to have a real conversation tonight. Ask each other the hard questions. Tell each other the difficult truths, before you end up here, 30 years in, realizing you're strangers living under the same roof. Robert looked at Patricia, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can be the husband you need. I've been who I am for so long, I don't know if I can change. Patricia's response was both sad and resolute. I don't know if you can change either, and I don't know if I can stay married to you while you figure it out. I've spent 30 years waiting for you to see me. I don't have another 30 years to give. Steve asked the question that was on everyone's mind. So what happens now? Are you saying your marriage is over? Patricia took a long moment before answering. I'm saying I can't keep living the way we've been living. Something has to change. If Robert is willing to actually do the work, if he's willing to go to counseling, if he's willing to learn how to be present and connected, then maybe we have a chance. But if he thinks we can just sweep this under the rug and go back to how things were, then yes, this marriage is over. All eyes turned to Robert. The cameras captured every emotion crossing his face. Finally, he spoke. I built a successful business. I can analyze market trends and negotiate complex deals. But apparently I failed at the most important job I've ever had, which was being your husband. I'm sitting here on national television being confronted with the fact that I've been a terrible partner for years and I didn't even notice. That's devastating. And you're right to call me out on it. I don't know if I can change, but I need to try. Not just for this marriage, but for myself. Because the man you're describing, the man who made you feel invisible, that's not who I want to be. The Family Feud episode never aired in its original form. The footage was too raw, too real, too painful for a game show format. But Steve Harvey, with the Thompson family's permission, did air a special segment on his talk show 3 months later. What happened in those 3 months became a story that resonated with millions of couples around the world. Robert and Patricia did not immediately separate. Instead, they made a commitment to intensive marriage counseling. They attended therapy 3 times a week for the first month. Robert cleared his schedule, something he had never done before for personal reasons. Patricia, for her part, committed to being completely honest about her feelings, even when it was uncomfortable. The counseling was brutal. Years of unspoken resentments came to the surface. Patricia revealed that she had felt like a business manager for their household rather than a wife. She talked about how Robert had missed her 50th birthday dinner because of a work call that could have waited. She talked about how he had never once asked about her therapy sessions, even though they had been going on for 6 months. She talked about how he knew every detail of his business but couldn't name her favorite flower or the last book she had read. Robert, forced to confront his behavior, initially became defensive. He listed all the ways he had provided for his family. He talked about the sacrifices he had made for his career so they could have a comfortable life. But the therapist helped him understand that Patricia wasn't questioning his financial contributions. She was grieving the emotional connection they had lost. Slowly, painfully, Robert began to see how he had prioritized everything except the relationship that mattered most. One breakthrough came when the therapist asked Robert to spend a full day with Patricia doing whatever she wanted to do without his phone, without any distractions. Robert agreed, though he was clearly uncomfortable with the idea. Patricia chose simple activities. They went to a bookstore and spent 2 hours browsing. They had lunch at a small cafe where they used to go when they were dating. They walked through a park and sat on a bench watching people. During that day, Robert realized how much he had missed. Patricia was funny when she felt free to be herself. She had opinions and interests he knew nothing about. She talked about wanting to go back to school to get her master's degree in counseling. She talked about how she had started painting again, something she had given up when the kids were born. For the first time in years, Robert saw Patricia as a person, not just as his wife fulfilling a role. But understanding the problem didn't automatically fix it. Robert struggled to change patterns he had established over decades. He would go days being present and attentive, then slip back into old habits during a busy work week. Patricia found herself hypervigilant, watching for signs that he was reverting to his old behavior. The tension in the house was often unbearable. Emma and Michael struggled with what they had learned about their parents' marriage. Emma admitted in a family therapy session that she had modeled her own marriage after what she thought her parents had. Seeing the truth behind the facade made her question everything. Michael revealed that he had avoided serious relationships because some part of him had always sensed the unhappiness in his parents' marriage, even if he couldn't articulate it. The turning point came during a session where Patricia admitted that she wasn't sure if she wanted to stay married even if Robert did change. "I'm 53 years old," she said. "I've spent my entire adult life taking care of other people. Part of me wonders if I need to be alone to figure out who I really am. I don't know if I can rebuild this relationship while also rebuilding myself." It was the first time she had voiced what she had been thinking for months. Robert's reaction surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of fighting to save the marriage, he said, "Then maybe we need to separate for a while. Not divorce, but actually live apart so you can have the space to figure out what you need. I've been selfish for 30 years. I'm not going to be selfish about this too." It was the most selfless thing he had ever done in their marriage. Patricia moved into a small apartment downtown. For the first time since she was 23 years old, she lived alone. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. She enrolled in a master's program. She took art classes. She joined a book club. She went to therapy alone and focused on her own healing rather than the relationship. She started to remember who Patricia was outside of being wife and mother. Robert, living alone in their large house, was forced to confront his own patterns. Without Patricia managing everything, he had to learn basic life skills he had neglected. More importantly, he had to sit with his own thoughts and feelings, something he had avoided through constant work for decades. Continued his own therapy, working on why he had used work to avoid intimacy and emotional vulnerability. When Steve Harvey had them on his talk show 3 months after the Family Feud incident, both Robert and Patricia looked different. They were sitting separately, not as a couple, but they both seemed lighter somehow. Patricia talked about her journey of rediscovery. "I'm learning that I don't need to shrink myself to fit into someone else's life. I'm learning that speaking up isn't selfish. I'm learning that I can love someone and still choose myself." Robert was honest about his struggles. "I realized I had no idea how to be in a relationship because I had never really been in one, even though I was married for 30 years. I was in a transaction. I provided money and status, and I expected everything else to be handled. That's not a partnership. I'm learning how to be vulnerable, how to ask for help, how to be present even when it's uncomfortable. I'm learning that success in business means nothing if you've failed at the relationships that matter." Steve asked the question everyone wanted answered. "So are you getting back together?" Patricia and Robert looked at each other before Patricia answered. "We don't know. We're dating. Once a week we have dinner and we talk, really talk. We're learning about each other like we're meeting for the first time. Because in many ways, we are. I'm not the same person I was before, and neither is he. We're figuring out if these new versions of ourselves can build something real together." The response to the talk show episode was overwhelming. The show received over 100,000 emails and messages from viewers. Many were from women who saw themselves in Patricia's story, women who had been feeling invisible in their own marriages but didn't know how to speak up. Others were from men who recognized themselves in Robert, men who had prioritized everything but their relationships and were suddenly aware of what they were losing. Marriage counselors reported a significant increase in couples seeking help after the episode aired. They said that Patricia's story had given many people permission to admit their marriages weren't what they seemed from the outside. The phrase, "feeling invisible," became shorthand for describing emotional neglect in a relationship. Emma started a blog about the lessons she learned from her parents' crisis. She wrote honestly about questioning her own marriage, about the hard conversations she had with her husband after seeing her parents' truth. "My parents' breakdown became my breakthrough," she wrote. "I learned to check in with my own feelings instead of just maintaining appearances. I learned to say when I'm unhappy instead of hoping someone will notice. I learned that a struggling marriage that's working on problems is healthier than a perfect-looking marriage that's dying inside." 6 months after the Family Feud incident, Patricia made a decision about her marriage. She and Robert met for their weekly dinner, and she told him that she wanted to continue their separation. Not because Robert hadn't changed he had, but because she needed more time to be sure of what she wanted. "I spent 30 years putting everyone else's needs first," she explained. "I need to make sure that if I come back to this marriage, it's because I want to, not because I think I should or because I'm afraid to be alone." Robert, to his credit, accepted her decision without trying to pressure her. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here working on myself whether you come back or not, because this isn't just about saving our marriage anymore. It's about becoming the kind of man I should have been all along. It was a level of emotional maturity he had never shown before. A year after that fateful Family Feud taping, Patricia and Robert were still separated but still seeing each other regularly. They attended their children's events together. They had dinner every week. They were building a friendship that had never existed in their marriage. Whether they would eventually reconcile remained uncertain. But both agreed that their relationship now, with honesty and respect, was healthier than their marriage had been for the past 2 decades. Steve Harvey often reflected on that episode in his comedy shows and interviews. "That was the day I realized game shows can accidentally become mirrors," he said. "Sometimes you ask a simple question and someone tells you a complicated truth. Patricia's answer ended a 30-year marriage, but maybe it saved her life. How many years would she have kept pretending? How many more years would she have felt invisible? Sometimes things need to break so they can be built correctly." The incident changed how Steve approached his hosting duties. He became more aware of the real people behind the contestants, the real lives that continued after the cameras stopped rolling. He started using his platform to talk more openly about marriage, communication, and the importance of emotional presence. Patricia completed her master's degree in counseling and started working with other women who felt trapped in unfulfilling marriages. She helped them find their voices, taught them that speaking up wasn't selfish, and showed them that choosing yourself sometimes meant choosing to leave or to demand better. Her personal experience became professional purpose. Robert scaled back his business significantly. He promoted a junior partner to handle day-to-day operations and focused on strategic planning that required less time. He started mentoring other businessmen, specifically talking about work-life balance and the real cost of success. "I made millions of dollars and nearly lost everything that mattered," he told one mentee. "Don't make my mistake. Success means nothing if you're successful alone." The question that Patricia answered that day on Family Feud became one of the most discussed moments in game show history. It wasn't about the game or the prize. It was about a woman finding her voice after 30 years of silence. It was about a man being forced to confront his failures. It was about a family learning that honesty, even painful honesty, is better than comfortable pretense. 2 years after that fateful day, during a follow-up interview, Steve asked Patricia if she regretted speaking up the way she did. Patricia didn't hesitate. Not for a second. "Yes, it was embarrassing. Yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, it hurt people I love. But staying silent was killing me slowly. That moment on Family Feud was the moment I chose myself. That was the moment I decided my feelings mattered. That was the moment I stopped being invisible." The legacy of Patricia's answer extended far beyond her own marriage. It sparked a national conversation about emotional labor in relationships, about the invisible work of maintaining a family, about the difference between staying and thriving. It reminded couples that longevity in marriage means nothing if those years were spent lonely. It showed that sometimes love means letting go, even if just temporarily, to figure out if the relationship is worth fighting for. For millions of viewers who watched that talk show episode, Patricia became a symbol of courage. Not the courage to leave a marriage, but the courage to tell the truth. The courage to stop pretending. The courage to demand more from life than just going through the motions. She showed that it's never too late to speak up, never too late to choose yourself, never too late to demand to be seen. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We share these powerful real-life moments because they teach us crucial lessons about relationships, honesty, and self-worth. Whether you're in a marriage that looks perfect but feels empty, or you're the partner who hasn't been paying attention, let Patricia's story be a wake-up call. Don't wait 30 years to tell your truth. Don't wait for a game show to finally be honest about your feelings. Have the hard conversations now. Check in with your partner meaningfully. Ask the real questions and listen to the real answers. Your relationship is worth the discomfort of honesty. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember that being seen and valued is not too much to ask for in any relationship.